With me is Todd Buchholz, a former director of economic policy at the White House. He was one of the first U.S. economists to forecast the 2001 slowdown in the U.S., the 2008 pop in commodity prices, and the downgrade of the U.S. debt rating. Thank you very much for joining me today.
You're welcome.
Let's start with your latest book, Rush, Why You Need and Love the Rat Race. You argue there that competition is the one thing to keep us going and growing strong. You reveal the problem that exists right now in the society, that there is a lack of desire to fight for anything, to fight for a good job, a good education. Is that really so?
We've had 20 years of focusing on self-esteem, trying to make kids feel better about themselves. And it didn't matter how they did on test scores, didn't matter what they knew or what they achieved. The whole point was it didn't matter. But the important thing was to feel good about yourself. So in Washington, D.C., for instance, they asked the students how they would assess themselves in mathematics. And the Washington, D.C. students felt that they had wonderful skills in mathematics. They had the best sense of themselves. They had great pride in their knowledge of mathematics. But when you looked at their test scores, it turned out they knew very little of anything. So we've spent 20, 30 years educating people that trying hard is not very important. And what's most important is just to feel good about yourself. But that is just a complete confusion, because the best way to get self-esteem is to do something worthy of esteem. And I'm afraid that younger people are now at a disadvantage in a pretty harsh economic climate. Well, even before the Great Recession, which began in 2008, we were seeing over the course of the last 20 years a decline in the willingness of young people to simply move to another state in order to take a job. We've seen a decrease in mobility. So yes, the Great Recession has made things worse, has made people even more nervous and worried about their futures, but these trends were in place beforehand.
Do you think Americans really are becoming those people who need a 3-hour lunch? You dub them as Generation Y, born to sit?
Bruce Springsteen in the 1970s had a famous rock album and a song called Born to Run. And he wrote about a generation that couldn't wait to get their driver's licenses, couldn't wait to get on the road and explore the country. And a study I've done recently, we see that young Americans are less interested in getting their driver's licenses. In the 1970s and 80s, nearly every high school student, once they turned 16 or 17, would have a driver's license. Now many are waiting till they're 18, 19, 20. And is that a cause of economic decline? No. But I think it is a symptom of a lack of motivation. So instead of being born to run, they seem born to sit on the sofa in front of Xboxes or PlayStations or their iPhones. Of course, there is a portion of the population and the young population that is very motivated, highly motivated, that is very ambitious and very aggressive, and certainly carving out great careers for themselves. So I'm certainly not going to suggest that an entire generation is sitting on the sofa. However, we have, especially in this harsh economic climate, certain states in the United States which are prospering, where the job market is very healthy, and other states where it's very poor. Well, you can rent a car, you can hop on a bus. It would only cost about $200 to get yourself on a bus from Nevada, a state with a terrible economic climate, to North Dakota, where you would have a job almost as soon as the bus arrives. And yet we're not seeing people making those sorts of moves. They seem to be waiting in place for the jobs to come to them. And I'm afraid that is not a very promising way to look at the job market these days.
So the go-go days of the 1990s turned into the go-backwards days of the 2000s. So where next?
The U.S. economy is above what a pilot would call stall speed. We certainly are growing fast enough, I believe, that we're not going to go back down into a double-dip recession. But the job market is painful. The job market is very weak. I think President Obama has not done much to help the job market. I don't think his stimulus plan was very effective. The only thing his stimulus plan did was scare people into believing that we now have debts that will be unpayable. And that the U.S. debt to GDP ratio will simply be unmanageable. So we've got an economy that's slowly repairing itself, but we seem to be avoiding tough decisions when it comes to how we're going to pay our debts in the years ahead.
Can we expect another stimulus plan?
I don't think there's going to be another stimulus plan out of the U.S. Congress. Certainly Republicans will not be in favor of it because they see that it's been a waste. And President Obama, I think, recognizes that the prior stimulus plans are no longer popular. In fact, I'm not even sure he will use the word stimulus anymore because now it has a tone of being negative because very few Americans believed it has created any jobs except maybe for some government bureaucrats. President Obama, a year and a half, 2 years ago, appointed a commission to examine the U.S. fiscal deficit debt problem. He appointed a well-known former Republican senator and a very distinguished advisor to President Clinton, obviously the previous Democratic president. Those two individuals, with their staffs, with congressional colleagues, spent months studying the deficit and the debt. It was the Simpson-Bowles Commission. And the president appointed them. And they came back with a plan that was very tough, that was very bold, that would cut some tax rates to make the U.S. corporations more competitive, but at the same time, they would cut spending, really across the board, including in retirement schemes. And the president was presented with this plan, and even though he chose the members of the commission, he walked away from the plan because President Obama doesn't care enough about the deficit and debt. And so I think until the president leaves office, whether that's in November or in January or 4 years from January, I think it's going to be very difficult for the U.S. to tackle these difficult economic and fiscal issues.
Right now, it looks like almost nothing that we have assumed to be safe can be taken to be safe. I'm talking here about the very currencies that we use, the biggest banks in the world. What is safe now?
There's always going to be some fear in the market, except when there's a bubble. Well, there's not a bubble now, so there is some fear in the market. And there's a big question mark over all paper currencies. There's a question mark about the value of the dollar and the euro and the yen and the ruble and every other currency that is not backed by some hard asset. So we have a positive sign next to GDP. Now, is it a big, bright, bold positive sign? No, it's kind of faint. Sometimes it hides a little bit. But I think there's been a demonstration that U.S. corporations aren't managed so badly after all. And they can withstand a pretty weakened economy. And so that will, I think, be giving investors a little bit more confidence in the stock market. And of course, that confidence has already been expressed in a pretty healthy rally over the course of the last year.
More than 10 years ago, in your book Market Shock, you warned that the Eurozone was unstable and heading towards political turmoil. You also said that the members of the Eurozone would stumble because of the differences in monetary policies. So what is your forecast now?
I think the Eurozone is like a really bad polygamous marriage with a whole bunch of wives and one husband and just disagreement, jealousy, and fighting constantly. But the Eurozone is a mess because they were never meant to be together. Ireland was a more inflationary place, as was Italy. Germany had low inflation. They needed different monetary policies, and now we've got this disaster. And it can't simply be solved by the ECB writing some checks. Greece is simply insolvent and uncompetitive. If Greece still had the drachma, it would have been devalued. There'd be tourists all from Germany flooding into Greece, bringing foreign currency, bringing their euros to Greece. The hotels would be filled. Instead, what do you have? You've got an economy that should have a big tourism base, but tourists won't go because they're afraid of riots in the streets. The prices haven't fallen because they're denominated in euros. And so you have empty hotels throughout Mykonos and Athens and Santorini. So it's very difficult to see how Greece survives as a member of the Eurozone. And it may very well be on some busy weekend, I don't know, when no one's paying attention during a World Cup match or something, that Greece will exit the Eurozone hoping that nobody notices. But it's going to be awfully hard to keep them in.